Many come to Germany with high hopes, immigrants and refugees who wish to land a proper job and start a new life. But some are trapped in exploitative circumstances where human traffickers benefit from their pain, desperation, and labor. Today I am joined by Laura Fritz from the International Rescue Committee to talk about the victims of human trafficking in Germany and how they can seek help. Thank you very much for being here today with us, Laura.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here.
Let's start by defining the issue. Who exactly are we talking about when we talk about the victims of human trafficking?
We could, for example, talk about a person coming to Germany to work in domestic care, who then ends up working in domestic care in a private home, but finds themselves working 24/7 without a break and with very little pay. And another example would be a person coming to work in meat processing, for example, who works very, very long hours and has before been asked to pay money to their agency, which then has to be paid off through excessive labor and very long hours. In general, is the use of force, fraud, or coercion to exploit certain people for profit. And this can happen to many people inside of Germany or people crossing borders. Often it's also related to migration, but it doesn't always have to be. And often the human traffickers also have a certain relationship with the trafficked person already before, so it can even be connected to family or other social ties. Of course, so people can be forced into sexual exploitation, labor exploitation, also forced begging, for example, forced slavery, or practices that are akin to slavery. Also, there's trafficking for the purpose of organ removal. So many of those sectors that migrants or asylum seekers or people, especially without papers, would work, maybe also here in Germany, could be industries that are the so-called informal industry, and those industries could be, for example, hospitality or also care work in the homes, meat processing, and so on.
And which countries do the majority of victims come from in Germany?
According to the report of the Federal Criminal Police, the victims are coming from different places. For example, here in Germany, 22.8% are coming from Germany. They're followed by people coming from Bulgaria, Romania, China, Thailand, Hungary. But those are only the official numbers. And since these numbers only include people who are actually going through reporting, it's very difficult to say where people are actually coming from, because not everyone is going to report. People who are coming from third countries, who are coming to Germany without papers because they are forced to do so through difficult migration routes, those people are even more likely to be exploited here in the labor market, because in many cases, if they don't have papers, they don't have the right to work, but then they're also not informed about their labor rights and also can't really use their labor rights. So that's a really, really big problem in general.
Germany's record is not as good as one would wish when it comes to their efforts to eliminate human trafficking. Why is that?
I think in general it's also really important to add that for people staying in Germany irregularly, if you report, then it can also be really dangerous for them, because they may fear deportation. They may fear also deportation through the Dublin system within Europe, going to another country. So it's very difficult for them. And also there's racism within the police. They might not feel safe with going to the police and reporting. Also, there might be language barriers, for example. In general, in Germany, the focus is on criminalization of the traffickers rather than actually working for the human rights of the trafficked human beings, which is already a big point, because that also means that, for example, lawyers are not trained enough to detect certain ways of trafficking and also not to detect the intersectionality within the trafficking. This also goes for other frontline staff or NGO workers and so on. So that's a general problem, because then not all cases of trafficking are detected. Also, there's not always accessible psychosocial support, or also support for their families, and also not enough money maybe to sustain themselves throughout the process. So there's still many gaps in the services that we have here in Germany.
What should immigrants and refugees watch out for, say, when engaging with recruitment companies to ensure they won't be trapped in exploitative circumstances later on?
First of all, it's very important that the recruitment agency doesn't ask for money in advance, because that can lead to debt bondage. And then it's more difficult for the person to leave the situation afterwards. And it's very common in the case of trafficking and also labor exploitation. Then what's also really important is that there is a contract, and the contract should be available in a language that is actually understood. Also, there need to be specific working hours, and those working hours need to be apart from living in a place or not living in a place. So there cannot be a 24-hour availability while living in a place and then getting paid less because you're actually staying in the same place as where you're working, for example. So there needs to be a minimum wage. Also, what's very important is that you should not give your passport away. So at all times you should keep your own identification documents. It's very important that there is no forced duties in general, and also that there is no surveillance. So by surveillance, I mean, for example, either you're being watched on what you're doing all day long and it's made sure that you cannot leave the premises, or also that you're being surveyed by a camera, for example, or by a tape or something like that. What is also really important to look out for is, for example, for very high pay for labor that there is no qualification needed for. And also it's important to look out for, in general, a promise of very high pay that seems unrealistic, or also a promise of visas, for example, or residence permit, that you can stay in the country for much longer than usually, because sometimes this can also be a way of people tricking someone into coming to work in the German economy.
And what about those who are already trapped? What types of support are there in Germany for victims who manage to come forward?
KOK, which is a national network of NGOs that are working on trafficking in human beings, and on the page of KOK you can find different service providers who are all working on supporting people who have been trafficked. So this is a really important address to check out. Otherwise, it's also good to see the page that's called Frauenhaussuche, because on there you can look for shelters in general, but also women's shelters, which you can call in case if you're in need of a shelter. There's also different hotlines that can be called if you need them. So there's, for example, a violence hotline for women that can be called. There is a violence hotline for men. And there's also the hotline of Weißer Ring, which is for victims of crime.
Thank you very much for being here with us, Laura.
Thank you very much for having me.